So I was playing through Sonic Frontiers Update 3 the other day, which I would like to save my thoughts on potentially for another time, as I would greatly enjoy not having my head chopped off. That's a joke. I thought it was buggy and unpolished, but fun overall. The towers aren't even that hard to climb. But something I couldn't shake while experiencing it was all the cutscenes where I could tell they were trying to create something really cool. Something that harkened back to the moments that people enjoyed from even some of the lowest reviewed games in the franchise. Bringing back a Sonic that was snarky but serious. A Sonic who wasn't afraid to be a dick to someone's face while still showing appreciation for those he cared about. Ending it off with him unleashing all his power onto the villain that threatens the freedom he lives for. However, despite all that, I just couldn't get invested. I couldn't find myself enjoying what I was watching as a story in the Sonic I know and love, because the cutscenes in Sonic Frontiers may just be some of the worst in the entire franchise. That's a bold statement, I know, and for a long time I had the belief that, yeah, sure, they're not great or anything, but at the very least they're a step up from the previous entry Sonic Forces. But at this point, I don't even agree with that sentiment anymore. I think Frontiers cutscenes are the lowest of the low in the history of Sonic the Hedgehog. Mainline games, at least. And I know we're all currently in the honeymoon phase, and this isn't something we'll all be able to properly reflect on until the next mainline game comes out, but it's something I feel is important to discuss. Because while, yeah, the story of Frontiers is not devoid of good moments, hell, it's got some stellar interactions between Sonic and friends, but as an overall package, a majority of the cutscenes in this game just leave me baffled as to how presentation-wise, they've only seemed to have gotten lower in quality since Sonic Unleashed, each subsequent game looking worse and worse. So today I want to go over cutscenes in the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise, mainly in relation to Frontiers, to try and figure out why these things just don't do it for me. And if you like them, that's cool. I wouldn't want to take that away from you, but maybe, hear me out. Who knows, maybe you'll end up understanding what I'm saying and even share a similar sentiment. At the end of the day, I want Sonic to succeed just like you, and the only way to do that is to point out when something could be improved upon. So without further ado, let's get into it. Obviously, the cutscenes look bad is a pretty broad statement when it comes to an entire video game. Of course, you're gonna have cases where some things look better than others. So I'm gonna be using a lot of examples from Frontiers Update 3 since it's fresh in my mind. But be aware, a lot of this video also applies to the rest of the game unless I state otherwise. Look at any random cutscene from Sonic Unleashed, which, by the way, was released in 2008. And now look at any cutscene from Sonic Frontiers, and tell me which looks better. Sonic Unleashed, right? Now look at a cutscene from Sonic Lost World compared to Frontiers. Lost World clears it. Then look at a cutscene from Sonic Forces comparatively. Starting to blur that line a bit, aren't we? I think it's apparent that the Sonic cutscenes we have today look the way they do because of the Hedgehog engine too, which is mainly to assist with lighting and the sorts. And now, I ain't no video game program typey guy, but I have to assume it's the contributing factor as to why they look so much worse when compared to the original Hedgehog engine's output. The only improvement I can think of is that they finally got rid of those ugly brown lips Sonic started to adopt in Lost World. And when I say I don't know why they look so bad visually, I mean it. I don't know why. But it results in the cutscenes to Sonic Frontiers looking so unfinished and amateur, especially when compared to what came before. Perhaps it's simply a result of the animation. As we've seen from bits of promotional material for Update 3 using the in-game renders, it becomes apparent that when posed well, these guys can look great. Not stellar or anything, but definitely passable. However, more often than not in the game, Sonic just stands around, often reverting back to that awful bent knee stance while staring into an endless void. I think that mostly comes down to a Western versus Eastern approach to animating. Obviously, Sega's games, including Frontiers, are primarily developed in Japan, and if you take a look at the other projects handled by them, well, it's mostly anime stuff, you know, who would have guessed? This isn't a big issue for those sort of games, because these models and these art styles are much more restricted when it comes to how their expressions and poses are animated. Also, with a game like Phantasy Star Online 2 having a much greater focus on story, it's par for the course to mainly have cutscenes of characters standing around flapping their lips. Again, this isn't bad, unless we're talking about Sonic. Because as we all know, he's a character who was designed with a Western market in mind. Sonic took heavy influence from rubber hose era mascots like Mickey Mouse and Felix the Cat, prominently featuring giant eyes, hands, and mouth. Sometimes two mouths. And so when you have all these exaggerated features that are just begging to be squashed and stretched and pushed to their limit, and then they're just not, it results in these characters not feeling real, just puppets giving endless amounts of expository dialogue. This aspect is actually made worse in Update 3, as for a majority of these smaller interactions you can do throughout the island, they didn't even bother cycling through default talking animations. You have Tails touting his insecurities and eventual proud explanation of his growth, both with the same blank smile on his face. It's lame. People clown on how over-animated the facial expressions of Sonic Adventure are, but hey, they stick out to you. I'd take that any day of the week compared to if they just stood around blankly staring at each other. You want something like that, then just go look at Sonic Shuffle's cutscenes and then get back to me. The Hedgehog engine seems pretty reliant on the lighting to do most of the heavy lifting visually, which shouldn't be a problem really, except for the fact that a majority of Sonic Frontiers cutscenes take place just in a field or in a desert, places without natural light sources. Some of the best looking cutscenes in Forces took place at nighttime with the soft glows of luminous forest making Sonic stand out. Now I compare that to the bright war zone at the end of the game and it just looks terrible. But I have to say, it's certainly better than most of what Frontiers has to offer. I'd like to give a special shout out to the final boss fight of Frontiers actually, with the end coming down to Sonic's level and the world being clouded with a purple sky. It makes things pop out way more and only proves to me that it's possible to have these cutscenes look good, they just need to put more thought into the colors and posing. But with the game having a day-night cycle, you can access a majority of these cutscenes at any point in time, which also means it's impossible for them to be pre-rendered. And so you just have this ugly in-game version of Sonic standing around twiddling his thumbs if they could be bothered animating him. Maybe the reason Unleashed looks so much better is because Sonic's model was generally just much higher in detail, using, as far as I'm aware, a near exact Marza model, which is so good it's been used to create some of the best animated appearances of Sonic in the entire franchise. The model has slowly been stripped away of polys to improve performance, which is then further tweaked with Forces giving Sonic much shorter proportions, and thus we're left with this strange amalgamation of different intentions and ideas that make you wonder why they don't just start from scratch. And there's no real justifiable excuse for this either in my opinion, as Sonic cutscenes from as far back as over 2 decades ago were able to achieve a much more cinematic effect. I do not think a single Sonic game has even come close to replicating just how ambitious and cool the story of Sonic Adventure 2 was told. Not in regards to scope or writing or even general quality wise, I mean in how the story was visually conveyed to you as a player. You could tell that each and every one of these cutscenes were meticulously thought out, from character placement to camera angle to what action they were doing, if the camera was moving or not. Rough around the edges, sure, and certainly could be improved upon, but this is a Sonic story conveyed at its best, unfortunately. I'll always think of a moment like Sonic meeting Shadow for the first time. There's a reason why he became a fan favorite, and I think the way they handled him in these cutscenes greatly contribute to that. We see a close-up of Sonic panting from the previous boss fight, creating a bit of seamless transition from the gameplay to story, only for him to see something off screen as we cut to an over-the-shoulder shot. We're getting Sonic's POV as he stares off at this tiny black hedgehog in the distance. Him standing on top of the robot you just defeated to symbolize his importance. He sees himself as being above you, Sonic literally has to look up at him. Us getting plenty of shots from Shadow's POV as well to show how small and insignificant he sees Sonic as. Also, like, the characters just feel alive despite how primitive their models are. They're not just standing around in cutscene mode listening to each other talk. Sonic is walking over to him as he speaks. You have that cool slow-mo part showing Chaos Control in action for the first time, before Shadow leaves using the power, making quite the exit as his abilities are so great it shines a blinding light in Sonic's face, causing him to get pinned for stealing the emerald and getting arrested. God, it's cool, and I don't even like this game. No cutscene in the entirety of Sonic Frontiers contains any sense of flow or energy or fun. Now, there are attempts, but 9 times out of 10 they fail, and it results in it all just being so static and boring, and I'm just sick of it. I feel like ever since Sonic Colors I've been waiting for a Sonic game that tries to evoke this feeling again, but it's been like 12 years, I don't think it's coming. And it's not because Frontiers is going for a more mysterious angle. Even if that was the case, I'd argue that's a bad decision. It's intentionally stilted. But this is an issue that plagued Forces too. Everyone just stands around waiting for the other character to finish their line as to not rudely interrupt. Sonic more often than not just stands around either with his hands by his side or crossing his arms, and it's just boring. Again, occasionally Frontiers does make an effort to do stuff like this. For example, you have the introduction of the first Titan, Giganto. They go out of their way to have a cutscene where Sonic is rushing through the field as he suddenly has to narrowly avoid the foot of Giganto. There's this really cool panning shot that visually shows you just how massive this guy is. So massive that at first he doesn't even know Sonic is standing there. That's a great detail, I love it. But then, that brings up an entirely separate issue that ends up hurting it in the end. And that is the pacing. I don't know what happened here or what the intention was, but as someone who usually likes to intake a lot of story in Sonic games, I find myself skipping almost all of the extra optional character interaction cutscenes in Update 3 because they're just so fucking slow. Sonic to me is a character who likes to gather the essentials and move on, always presented as someone who can't wait to get into the action. But here, and only here because this wasn't really present in Forces, the voice actors are directed to read their lines as slowly as possible. Like, that doesn't equate to what you're seeing suddenly being all the more impactful. It just makes me want to put a bullet through my head. I'd rather that than have to sit through another 5-minute cutscene that feels like it could have been cut down to 2. I'm all for a greater focus on story in Sonic, but just feeling like that time with dead space in between every sentence doesn't do it for me and only serves to make me like your story less.
All right. I'm listening.
Moments ago, your friends sacrificed their corporeal forms to suppress your cyber corruption and return you to this dimensional plane.
They were so close to being free again, and they gave it all up for me. I don't care how many islands or titans it takes, I'm getting them back this time.
Like, is this exciting? Am I meant to be waiting for each word with bated breath? It's as if it's being written for a show or a movie. But if that's what you want, then you need to make sure that the visual storytelling complements that, because in Frontiers, it's only detrimental. Good example, this part right here.
Speeches about the superpower of teamwork.
This is clearly meant to be the moment in the story where Sonic is racing against the clock. Eggman has just insulted him for his friendship right after Tails, Knuckles, and Amy just sacrificed themselves to give Sonic more time. And you could tell they wanted to have this moment be a case where Sonic is pissed off, he's enraged, before understanding that won't get him any closer to saving his allies, which is shown through him stopping at the side of Siege, who wants to tell him about her plan. Where then Sonic realizes working with Eggman is for the greater good, and now wants to use this pent-up energy to save the day. That's really cool and it's written well, but it comes off so slow and laughable because the animation doesn't complement this. The game is filled with all this dead air in between lines that may seem minor, usually only being a second or two, but it adds up and causes the whole thing to feel unnatural. But this is only because it's paced as if the animation is better than it is. These quiet moments of dead air are supposed to be for character acting. We see Sonic thinking to himself, we see him get pissed at Eggman, not just grrr. We're supposed to see him realize he's losing focus when he looks at Siege, but instead we just get... We're meant to see him contemplate working with Eggman only to come around to it, ready to get started. Instead, he reverts back to his default stance, moves into a stock crossing arms animation, then just pulls that one stock raising eyebrow expression he does constantly throughout the game. It's boring, you're not seeing anything that you haven't seen them cycle through a million times already, not even his smile at the end is convincing. And I know this is a lot of complaining about the newest Sonic game, which is basically the same thing as putting a target on your head, but I just can't see anyone looking at this and not agreeing that it could have been done miles better if they bothered to get more than a handful of people animating these cutscenes. Or more realistically, if Sega gave them the actual budget to do so. I saw people posting this part all over Twitter like, damn, Sonic was ready to throw heads, this is peak right here. And I'm just left like, did we watch the same cutscene? And I don't want Ratchet & Clank-esque motion capture because that's been done dreadfully in this franchise before. Ratchet characters have much smaller eyes and realistic proportions which help them better. And I'm not asking for the level of cartooniness present in Crash 4 because obviously Frontiers is leaning into a more serious direction for the franchise. All I ask for is a bit of life. A sign that these are real characters who feel real emotions. This wasn't that big of an issue in Colors, Generations, and Lost World because the characters never went beyond happy, sad, angry. But now that they want these characters to be taken seriously, and now that they want their personalities to have some depth, my suspension of disbelief is going to actually have to believe that these are characters capable of feeling a vast spectrum of emotions. And this is such a big issue because Frontiers, in theory, has so many cool moments that are completely undermined by the lackluster presentation. We get to the end with Sonic turning into this ultra cool new corrupted cyber form, and I couldn't help but laugh. I really wanted to like the story of Sonic Frontiers, and there's a lot I do appreciate. However, I just can't help but feel like Ian Flynn's improvements in writing are only being undermined by the terrible voice direction on all the characters. Well, except maybe Tails. And the animation not conveying what it should in an expressive and engaging way. Now that Sonic Team has been given a seemingly bigger budget for whatever comes next, I'm hoping we see an upgrade in animation quality for the series. But I'm not holding my breath. I said the same thing when Forces came out, and I'm saying the same thing again. Alright, I'm gonna go. Bye.